Thank you so much for joining me for this discussion. Could you please introduce yourself and your channel to whatever depth you feel comfortable?
I'm Clay Papyrus. My channel mainly focuses on the Bible, focusing on like the academic study of the Hebrew Bible and the history, archaeology, and religion of the ancient Levant and the ancient Near East as a whole, that whole region. So I'm studying it for my undergrad right now. So I'm studying archaeology and religion. So this is very much down my alley and my academic interest. And so my channel has kind of in the past acted as like my, I guess I could say, sort of like a proxy of my academic interest. And so like I love researching this, so like that's why I put so much resources into studying the Bible and the ancient Near East. My channel kind of came from a motivation to create more dialogue about the Bible and the ancient Near East. Because there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of misconceptions about the Hebrew Bible, about ancient Israel, about the ancient Near East, and so I wanted like my channel to sort of be a place where I could try to damper that misinformation, where I could try to promote actual good scholarship and good information about the ancient Near East, because like it has a big effect on our society today, whether we like it or not. The ancient Near East is like one of the most influential regions and time periods ever. Like the Bible is a text that like almost half the population of the world stems their beliefs from to some degree. And so I believe that it's very important that we know the context of the Bible, because it not only has it has major societal implications for us today. And even in my faith, I'm a Christian. I grew up in very a very conservative Christian home. So I also, part of my channel was also to help others who were dealing with questions of faith, because that's what I was dealing with. I was dealing with questions of, is the Bible true? What is going on? Why is there all these things like in the Bible? Like why don't they necessarily like have the data support them historically? Why isn't the Exodus like is the Exodus potentially not historical? Why is the days of creation not historical? Why is all the XYZ whatever you want to get into? Why doesn't the historical data support that? And often you'll see that on the internet and as a way to like criticize Christianity, criticize my beliefs. And so like it was very like confusing for me at first. I'm like, okay, do I either, because it presented this like dualism of you either have to accept everything about Christianity, accept everything about the Bible as literal, true historical fact, or you completely reject the Bible as a fairy tale. And so it was create kind of this dualism where I'm like, okay, do I like reject, but what do I do? And so, but I found a lot of comfort in scholars and other Christians who pointed out, hey, you don't have to have this dualism. You can still believe the Bible is true, infallible, and the Word of God, but recognize it has historical flaws, because it's not meant to be a history book. It's meant to be a book about a people, about their relationship with God. And so I don't I don't see that as I don't see it as contradictory anymore. I see it now as faith and history aren't contradictory. They overlap and they can help amplify each other. And so I can't kind of wanted my channel to be sort of representative of like a Christian who believes in the faith, tenets of the faith, but also recognizes the historical like data and the issues. And I wanted to use that through my channel as a way like me trying to be as unbiased as possible, showing that you could be a Christian and not necessarily uncomfortable or like even antagonistic towards the historical data. I've actually gotten some few comments a few times actually that like from I think from an atheist that said like this really your videos, because you're a Christian and because you did such well research and you're so like you're people a lot of people comments today I'm biased. I disagree with that, but they said like you do so good research, like this made me reconsider my view on Christians. So that's like sort of the thing I want to do in addition to educating them about the ancient Near East. And it kind of served like as my own sort of interest into the field, like splash into the field. Most of my videos on my channel, actually all of them. I made them while I was in high school, and because I just entered my undergraduate program, and like last year, and that's why I've actually slowed down on my videos. So I used my videos first as like a way for me to find my interests, and through my research, through my like reading, I was able to like figure out and land on, oh shoot, I really like this topic within archaeology and biblical studies. And so actually it's been beneficial for not just like my channel, my audience, but for me as well, helping me find out what I'm interested in. Because I wasn't able to do research before, because obviously I'm just in high school. So I use the channel to help me find out, find who I am, refine what I'm interested in, and give me knowledge. It's greatly benefited me in my program that I've had this knowledge, and it's been great.
Excellent. Thank you so much for such a detailed and deep explanation of the motivation behind your channel, and for providing that personal background as well. I noticed when I was looking through one of your videos, the video entitled "When Egypt Was an Empire, Egypt's Wars in Palestine Explained." I was very impressed by your list of sources. I noticed you'd used a range of different sources for that video. So I noticed you cited Ulstrom, and you cited Mazar and Finkelstein and Grab and Knoll. And what I noticed was you were citing across the scholarly spectrum. Ulstrom, who was an earlier scholar, Mazar, very much a current generation scholar, also Finkelstein, Grab and Knoll, current generation scholars. At the same time, Grab and Knoll more on the minimalist side of the archaeological discussion. Finkelstein, who doesn't like to be called a minimalist, but is closer to the minimalist than the maximalists. And then Mazar, who's definitely more of a moderate in between the maximalist and minimalist positions. So I noticed that not only were you quoting across the breadth of scholarship chronologically, you were also quoting across the breadth of scholarship in terms of the positions which various archaeologists and Bible scholars have taken. And I was impressed by that, because it demonstrated to me that you were making a genuine attempt to represent the true breadth of the scholarship on the issue, rather than just picking your favorite scholars. For example, if I'd seen only Ulstrom, Finkelstein, Grab, and Knoll, I would have thought, okay, this guy is focusing on the minimalists, and he might be losing a bit of balance since he doesn't have any of the moderates, or even not even the maximalists, but even some of the more moderates like Mazar and Baruch Halpern. And
B, you mentioned B. Oh,
yeah, and
I love B.
And Abraham Faust. Yeah, so what impressed me was that you weren't picking, say, just your favorite maximalists or just your favorite minimalists. You had a very good cross section of the scholarship on this particular issue from multiple perspectives, from perspectives of scholars who don't typically agree with each other on some of these issues. And I liked that, because it showed that you were being intellectually honest by presenting these scholars across the breadth of scholarship on the issue, which meant that it was very unlikely that you were cherry picking. Do you want to make a comment about Baruch Halpern?
Oh, Baruch, I love B. He's great. He's potentially, well, yeah. No, B's great. I love him. I have a professor here at my institution who's also his one of his students in grad school.
Oh, right. Wow. So, excellent.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I've been in contact with him.
Oh, that's fantastic. Right.
Yeah. We talk a little bit about Finkelstein, and it's always the running joke that in the archaeology biblical scholarship world, it's always the running joke of how will this research anger Israel Finkelstein? But they're really good friends, like even despite disagreeing. And it's funny that you mentioned the history of ancient Egypt, not Egypt's wars in Canaan. That's probably like my least, like one of my like most lazily researched video, because
oh really?
because I needed basically a filler video, and I had this idea of collaborating with Soma's Academy.
Oh yes, very good channel.
Oh yeah, they're great. I've known them for I think a few years.
Oh wow, now. Really? Yeah.
Yeah, and so I ripped a ton of the sources from my the history of the Canaanites video, and then a ton of other sources I knew, because I knew a lot about the Iron Age, because like I interacted with it before. I actually was planning on eventually making a United Monarchy video where I talk about the United Monarchy, but I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to touch this. So I just used some of the material from like my research and that, and use that to talk about Egypt.
Right,
I would say my
right.
magnum opus was probably the Canaanite video, and I cited a ton, and that's where I did my most of my research, and that's probably
Right.
like where I got most of my researching strategies from that.
Yeah, I do hear what you say about the debate having moved on to a very large extent past the likes of Finkelstein and Diva.
My main research interests have been in the Transjordan, and compared to Israeli archaeology, Jordanian archaeology, that there's not much. So, like, because
I guess there's
for first off,
a lot less political interest for a start.
right, for sorry, yeah, exactly. Like the Israeli government kind of uses archaeology as
Mm,
it's hard. It's that's a whole hard situation. Yeah, that's something I'm even struggling with because I would love to study in Israel, but yeah, it's hard. But my main research is on the Jordan, and so um, in Jordan there's not as much. First off, yeah, as you mentioned, not as much funding. There's not as much archaeological data either because historically the Jordan has always been a little bit more sparsely populated, a lot more nomadic, a lot more not very many population centers. So all excavations have not like happened that much at all, and at least in the area that I'm studying, Jordan, because you have some of like the main centers, like main like urban centers, like Karak. Karak was like with like the main like probably like one of the main cities in the Iron Age in Jordan, but we can't excavate it because a freaking Crusader fort is plopped right on top of it, and
oh,
we can't do
right,
anything.
right. Yeah.
And so, yeah, yeah, and I just hope that more sites in general are excavated in Jordan because there's not that many. There's only I can only think of, well, in my area of Jordan, there's not that many sites excavated. And you go up
Right.
to you go past the Hezbollah region, like past the Wadi Mujib up north, north of Madaba, and like what was Amman and the Iron Age, you'll find tons of sites. But in Moab, you won't find much. And
Mm,
it's sad, but there's not much going on. It's hard to figure it out. So yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
but there's tons of stuff to find, and I think even just like looking at like the text, like I mean, looking at like the data we do have, and thinking about it differently is in general like will change like will create new developments. Like the way like Finkelstein looked at it differently,
Yes.
and
Yes.
despite like having the same data,
Yeah. Yeah. That was actually a major point in the Diva Finkelstein debates. There was a lot of commentary on the fact that they were really at the subjective end of archaeology, both of them looking at objectively the same data and arriving at different conclusions based on different theoretical frameworks. There were sometimes occasional differences which were based on more or less or slightly different data. For example, a few different data points, which one either decided to incorporate or the other one excluded. But even then, that just demonstrates how so much of their debate actually came down to a difference in archaeological philosophy, the framework of their praxis as well.
that's kind of like where the field's moving. Like it's more so like framework rather than
Yes, right.
issue because a lot of like the debate like the last like for the past few year like I mean like 2020 like 2019 to 2019 continuing like there's been a little bit of debate you see between Finkelstein and Yosef going back and forth about what nomads can do, how to find nomads in archaeology basically. And so
Yes, yes,
you
that's
see
right.
like this sort of thing like yeah it's starting, and Ben Yosef him and other scholars like introducing like archaeology archaeological and anthropological theory has been huge. And so, yeah.
I also have read some conference papers and exchanges between on subjects like the Exodus, discussions between people like attendees of the conference and presentations given by people like Mazar and Amnon Ben Tor and Halpin and Diva, which I found very fascinating as well, because they were all slightly critical of each other. So I do think that going forward, that transdisciplinary or multidisciplinary approach has the best potential to break some of these scholarly deadlocks that we've seen in the past. And I'll be very interested to see what happens next. And I'll be fascinated to and much appreciative of any leads you can give me on the field, since I'm a little bit out of that loop now. I haven't looked at some of these issues for a little while. So I'd really appreciate any suggestions you can give for scholarship that I could or should read on the topic.
Yeah, it's definitely moving towards a more multidisciplinary approach. Yeah, it's including like it's trying to basically like a lot of scholarship I've seen is like trying to basically create like have a new perspective on the data. And for example, I've seen an emphasis on like environmental archaeology a lot more, like environmental climate sort of issues, like because it does like for example, we found that the subsistence patterns of this specific site in Transjordan, we found out that it had specific subsistence patterns, and that created a lot of info that we didn't know.
Diva's work actually on the settlement of the hill country, I thought, was particularly good in that regard, because he was demonstrating how the people who did move to that hill country, whom he believed were at least what he called proto-Israelites, were adapting to a new environment and were figuring out ways of managing their existing, at least semi-pastoralist way of life in this new environment, indicating that they weren't from there originally. They were from the lowlands.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, it's been a lot of like reinterpretation. A lot of also uses of like GIS, geospatial, but also a lot of interaction with anthropological theory. And you can see that a little bit with Faust. A lot of scholarship recently, especially with Ben Yosef, has been challenging like certain notions of the idea of ethnicity, the idea of a tribe, the idea of social complexity and like monumentality, and like what does that indicate about the political formation and social formation of the Levant. And what a lot of people are noticing is, oh, these like things we took for granted were actually constructs of the colonial period. Right. 19th century anthropological scholarship, a lot of people like are noticing that and like, okay, we need to like reorientate the way we think about it without that. And that's what I kind of try to do with my current project I'm working on, looking a lot more about like understanding the society like as they would have understood it, the native symbols of social order per se, rather than it has this percentage of monumentality, therefore of monumental works, therefore it should be classified as a chiefdom or a state.
Right.
At least I still use the term state, but like I try to avoid chiefdom as much as I can. But
I know, yeah.
So, the idea of like social development, like the social evolutionary ladder, has kind of been thrown in the bin. Most of the field like has thrown it in the bin already, or is beginning to.
So that actually helps to move us on to my next question. Can you describe your research method and what quality control measures you take for your videos?
My research method is mainly, at least for my videos, I wanted to, I guess, get as much relevant scholarship as I could, because I sourced a lot from books and articles that talked about like sort of that were less technical per se. I did include some technical articles and technical readings, but like because I wouldn't be going into that, I included a lot less. I actually did include a few on my video, on a few of my videos on the Galileans and Jordan, and the Canaanites. I included some of that, talking about the city-states dynamics, but also the Habiru, and so I just basically try to get. As you say, I do try to get like the breadth of scholarship. I try to get as much as I can, all into all into my videos, and I mainly do that to make sure I don't go off the rails. I don't like I have some accountability, and so because this is a big issue, and I want to have I want my whatever I say, whatever information I put out in my videos, I want to have something that can at least back it up. And if someone tries to say, "Hey, what's the thing about this issue? Like, why did you say this instead of like this?" Like, and I actually have like people have been I've pointed out, for example, for my video on Canaanite religion, someone pointed out that um, the god Moloch, scholars are doubting whether or not Moloch existed, and more
Yeah,
so
exactly.
suggesting
Yeah,
that
especially as represented in the texts. Yeah.
right. And so I actually said, I someone pointed that out, but then they was like, "Oh, you already mentioned that," because I included Moloch in the pantheon because I did notice that a few scholars still kind of held on to the idea of
Right.
Moloch being part of the pantheon, but I did note like it's debated whether or not like he actually like existed because people like I feel like if I I feel like if I misrepresent an issue, I feel like I'm doing a disservice to my followers by not
Yes.
accurately educating them. Because this is important stuff. Because especially like with it being so influential on um like on modern religion and modern
Right.
society.
Yes.
I feel like I have to provide a decent amount of sources, at least like a decent agreement in order to accurately convey information. And the thing, what I've noticed though is that scholars don't agree a lot. Oftentimes they disagree. So it's I also have to like balance. Okay, what do I say like about like it's not like a major thing, but like about like certain dates for uh, certain battles or like the reasons behind battles. And I like have to like weigh that out. I'm like, okay, whose opinion do I go with? And I just try to like keep as many sources as I have, and I just like I also like just try to keep as many sources, and I try to put as many sources as I can in there because not only I feel like not only more sources equals more research, but also it helps you with your credibility. It helps you like with your
Yeah,
accountability. And
definitely.
so
Yeah. Not from the perspective of the sheer volume, just like scholarly consensus isn't valuable simply because of the sheer number, but because of the fact that you have looked across the breadth of scholarship rather than taking a vertical slice and cherry picking, but you've actually had a look at
right,
how the consensus has formed, if there is a consensus, or you know why there isn't a consensus, and you've looked at some of the major points of scholarly debate, this kind of thing, so that it's the breadth, as you say, that you've done, the breadth of research that you've done, and you've been able to construct your arguments as an accumulation of scholarship from multiple perspectives. And when you see scholars from multiple perspectives, maybe even with slightly different interpretive frameworks, arriving at the same kind of conclusions, that's a good sign. Not that it necessarily means they're right, but it does mean that there's no collusion. This is kind of an organic agreement. It's more likely to be correct than not, because it's a position which has been cross-examined from these different perspectives by people, some of whom maybe be stakeholders, but some definitely aren't.
I 100% agree, and yeah, and so that's what I kind of try to do, and I like just try to balance it, try to find at least some sort of thing, and of course, like because this is a YouTube audience, this is I'm not able to completely put everyone to sleep in a writing. I have to create some sort of. I do have like what I mean. History is a narrative. Like history is a narrative about like what happened. So about like narrating past events. So in that sense, I am like trying to like figure out how does this fit? Because like, how does like this fit in the I guess the flow of like the script, the channel of like my video. I don't know exactly how to explain that, but I just like try to figure out like how do I sort of write this down and say it. And so I like make sure like I harp on myself like over and over and over, cite your sources, like cite your source, and I often will cite them to like a ridiculous degree because like I view it as sort of like a insecurity because like I'm scared of like some commenter like actually knowing what they're talking about and commenting, you said this wrong, you said like this, when actually it's that. And so I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, I need to actually like make sure like I actually want to like have like a good like solid foundation, and so I do that. And I make sure that like every claim I make is not unsubstantiated. Like I always try to find like every sentence that I say, unless I'm like summarizing information or I say information that I'm about to talk about, I always cite it. And that's just like accountability for me, but also it's accountability for me with my audience. Like they know that I'm sourced correctly. For me, knowing that my what I'm saying is well substantiated, because I found out after like doing these YouTube videos and then actually going into actual research undergraduate that I've like learned that it's a very different animal than YouTube research. And so in YouTube, I'm trying to describe like what happened. I'm trying to describe the certain history of something, the
Mm.
scholarly consensus. While paper, I'm in the scholarly literature, but also I'm interacting with it, critiquing it over here. Boom, 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 making
Yes, right.
connections with different literature and stuff. So it's very different. But yeah, I just try to make sure that I'm with my research methods. I just try to like look through like different source, like different readings, and make sure that I'm just like not going out on a limb saying something that like is completely unsubstantiated. Most of like, and you mentioned Alstrom,
Yes.
and like I used him mainly because like different literature has different purposes. Like Alstrom,
Sure. Yep.
his history like is pretty good, and the fact that it describes like events of like what the Egyptians did, and so that's why I mainly used him, because he described pretty good what the Egyptians did and stuff like that. So I was able to understand like different things what Egyptians did, but I also did have a decent amount of there was some things wrong with that, and I actually brought that through using Ostrom because I used him to talk about in my Canaanite video, and I talk about Canaan from about ever since humans inhabited it all the way until the end of the late Bronze Age. And
Right.
a lot of what Alstrom said, well, not Alstrom, but the guy who helped Alstrom construct the Paleolithic and Neolithic passages, that was actually that was actually outdated because of how fast paleo anthropology and paleo history works. I had Soma actually look over it, and they pointed out some things that were wrong with it. I was like, oh shoot, okay, so I changed it. And so I just try to keep levels of accountability for myself and also for my audience to know that I'm not just talking out of thin air. I'm not just making
Yes.
stuff up, because often you see that with history channels, like they say stuff and their sources like trust me, bro. And so I wanted to show that like I can try to be honest, and that's what I like struggle with, and like it was hard for me to be honest because like my theology did not fit like the
Of
historical data.
course.
But
Yeah.
now looking back, I'm like I don't have any issues really, because my theology now is like has been formed around that and like supports my passions, like other than like dampers it. And
Coming
so,
into conflict. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
for example, like in my church history class yesterday, my my church like my professor brought up how the tempter in Luke 8, I believe, or whenever Jesus was getting tempted by the devil, um,
Yep.
in that gospel passage, he actually brought up how that was like a later tradition, not original in the
Right.
text. And I was like, okay, and like I was like, okay, I can see that, and then that's not like not a big deal to me. All the rest of like my classes like going into a riot and stuff because I
All
go to
right. Yeah.
a Baptist university. Yeah, I go to a Baptist university,
Yeah.
so it's always
Right. Of course. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
yeah, and so and in Hebrew too, like we're interacting with like different like we're interacting with judges and stuff, and we see like different stuff. It's just very freeing. It's very relaxing. I'll say it's a very relaxing theology. But yeah, it just motivates me to investigate further because I just think it's something very important that needs to be talked about. That's part of why I do the channel. And also I hope to, like, by me sourcing myself, I hope that like other channels actually start sourcing. It's like one thing like I loved about like making these videos is like actually being able to change people's perspectives and actually helping people.
Right.
Because oftentimes you don't see that, and like oftentimes history channels, you don't really see that. You see kind of like I mean, there's nothing wrong with this, especially like about war, like World War II and stuff, like World War One, stuff like that. Like you see a lot of loving, like, you know, the Roma booze, like the Roman Empire.
Oh,
lovers,
absolutely.
like
Yeah, that's right.
the Prussian booze. See a lot of that, and some of the mainstream history channels. And while I may kind of be like a Semitic boo, I don't know how you put that. I do like how my channel kind of like helps people, and I've seen that in the comments a bit, informing people, like letting them know like what actually happened.
When you're doing your research, would you say that you use more primary, secondary, or tertiary sources?
I actually, okay, so I very rarely used primary sources. I mainly use secondary sources because the primary sources on the topics are usually, they're not really there. You got the Bible, of course, and of course I cite the Bible, but it's complex as a historical document. So I try to more take, like, I mainly engage with the secondary literature, the scholarship, because like, especially before, like now I can probably interact with the primary sources a lot better. I definitely am doing that in my research right now. But before then, I had no experience in Hebrew, no experience in textual criticism. I had no idea what to look for. And so now so I just like cite secondary sources. I don't know exactly about tertiary sources. I haven't interacted with those much. So,
Right.
would you mind defining tertiary sources?
Primary sources, we know primary sources are those proximate to the historical event. Secondary sources are typically scholarly commentary on the primary sources, or commentary or reporting on the primary sources. Doesn't need to be scholarly. And tertiary sources are typically systematic summaries or systematized presentations of the secondary sources. So Bible dictionaries, encyclopedias, literature reviews, those are tertiary sources.
I would say probably a decent amount of my stuff mainly uses, like, I mainly used comprehensive histories. For example, like I used Devers' history, Beyond the Text.
Oh, yes, right.
And then I used Mazar and Finkelstein. Like, it isn't like
Yes.
in-depth, very focused articles. I try to use comprehensive history. And now, like, now that I've actually, like, now that I know how it works a lot better, I probably will include, I will definitely include more articles, because like now I'm realizing, oh shoot, books don't, like, they don't cover that much. But I did include a lot of articles in my work. For example, I included, especially talking about like the linguistic development of the Apiru, of the, I cited Naaman's article. I cited a few others, I think, on that. My main sources were actually, on a few of my videos, were actually were articles for the Gasoline video. Those were mainly articles. There's not much books on it, so that's all I used. So it just really depends on the context. If I'm trying to summarize historical events across time, more likely to use like comprehensive histories, still made by scholars. It's like still have like
Sure. Yep.
still very influential. Like there's books out there right now that like cited heavily, and like I cite them heavily still, and they're really great. But then there's also and so, but I also use some articles. It just depends on context. If the book answers what I want it to answer, then I'll just use the book. But like if I want to go more in depth on this particular issue, then I'll do that.
Since you'd mentioned that you're currently writing a thesis on the Misha Stele, I assumed that definitely you would be examining primary sources for that in particular, such as the Misha Stele itself, possibly also for relevant context, the Tel Dan Stele and some of the relevant Ostraka. So I'm sure you will be looking at the primary sources.
Oh yeah, I've already translated the Mesha Stele.
Oh, brilliant! That's brilliant.
Yeah,
wow.
So I'm mainly referring to like my YouTube videos, because
yes, I see. Yep.
It's been a whole, I've gone through like a whole year of college, like since, because I uploaded my last video in my first semester, and but I wrote it originally. I wrote it during the summer, so it's
Yes.
been a whole year of working, of doing it. Yes, no, I definitely quote the Mesha Stella. I quote, yeah, in my thesis, I I heavily quote primary sources. It's my main argument. Like my main
Yes,
argument
right.
of my thesis is the specific language used in. And I look a lot at like I sadly do not kills me every time I know this, but I look a little bit at a little bit at Assyrian texts. I sadly do not know Akkadian yet, so I'm not able to interact with it as much as I would like to. I use Mesh Style. I also use some of the fragments we see across Moab. There's the Karak inscription, which was a little tiny fragment statue that was inscribed, but the fragment included the exact few words of the first line of the Mesha Stela. So it's assumed to be made by Mesha in Karak. There's this new finding that was just found in 2019 at Ataruz. Talks about this small inscription found at Ataruz, and it potentially talks about the events in the Mesha Stela with the Ivri, potentially mentioning the Ivri, i.e., the Hebrews. So, but I don't know exactly because like put out by some really good scholars, but like it's like tenuous because like it's of course like it's a
Of
small
course.
inscription. We don't know that
Right.
much, but yeah, I include a ton of that. Secondary sources. That's my main thing. My main sources I use are articles, commentaries on the actual primary sources, and yeah, I only include a little bit of tertiary sources in my research now, especially because I only include it like at the introduction when I'm summarizing like the climate, the topography, the general history. I don't the stuff that just introducing the topic. Yeah, I do interact with Second Kings 3 as well because
Of
of the
course.
events
Yep.
corresponding. And I do mention a little bit of the Teldan Stela, although not much because I don't know if you know this, but well, you probably do. Some scholars have said that the House of David is also mentioned in the
Yes.
Mesha Stela,
Yes.
and so I disagree with that. So I actually argue kind of against that in my thesis. Yeah, the main thing I'm trying to analyze is like the idea of Moabite identity. How was Moabite identity
Right.
conceived?
Yep.
How did Mesha state operate? And so I just like look at the different, like I just try to make parallels to like that's why I make parallels to Assyria because they viewed their identity a certain way, and so I'm like making a parallel to Moab. I think Moab conceived the same way, can see their identity
Right.
around the same way. So yeah, I interact with primary sources a lot. Just not like I just wasn't able to in my YouTube career because like my YouTube videos until I ever like I do a video on what my thesis is about.
Do you follow or read any particular scholars relevant to your field? For example, I would think someone like Christopher Rolston would be very useful, particularly since he blogs so frequently and is one of the first and most balanced commentators, particularly on any recent epigraphical finding, especially when it seems it's going to be exploited for political or theological reasons.
I actually don't know Christopher Olsen that much. You actually introduced me to him just now, but yeah, no, he looks great. But no, I read a lot of Bruce Routledge, his articles, Brooke Halpern. I love his David Secret
Oh, of
Team
course,
and
yes.
his
Yeah,
analysis on David and the way he analyzes the textual sources of in the Bible. That lens he uses, I actually apply
yes,
to the Mesha Stela.
right.
I've actually
Okay,
had
yep.
conversations with Dr. Halpern about that. So
Thank you so much for the time that you've taken. I really appreciate the depth that you've gone into with this discussion. And I hope our viewers found it useful not only from the perspective of the challenges which face people doing research in certain fields, but also the importance of consulting a breadth of scholarship, particularly in more complex fields and fields which are moving reasonably quickly, or which, even if they're not moving particularly quickly, tend to have quite dramatic shifts every now and then in the scholarly consensus. And hopefully, people will come away with a better appreciation of the amount of work that is necessary in order to produce a video which is reliably informative on some of these more difficult topics. And thank you also for sharing your personal faith journey, for want of a better term, and your own struggle with these sources and with the historical data. I really appreciate all the work you've put in tonight. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's been great. I've loved it. It's yeah, it's a good field, and I think more people should know about it. So thank you.